Hello, Mordarim here. Today with an update to my Frozen Orb Conjurer build for Season 4 after getting to push it into higher pit levels. The build clears extremely fast, moves around like Sonic and is super engaging to play with constant resets on your cooldowns. You have always something to press. Frozen Orb will get through everything in record speed, but there is a problem. Boss DPS is lacking. Now to get here we are looking at a more optimized setup in terms of gear, Paragaon and the Skilltree, so make sure to stick around and look at the planner. But first a quick word from today's sponsor. Mobilytics is a great source for a variety of different guides, featuring tier lists, meta builds by promoted content creators and community builds, which you can also publish yourself. You can also enjoy an overlay with their app with timers so you know when bosses and events pop up. This overlay also lets you look at planners, make adjustments to your own builds and hide it with simple commands without any trace. So make sure to check it out. Now as far as the build goes, let's talk performance first. Held tiles are a joy to clear, farming Night and Dungeon goes super fast, much faster than Blizzard, which promoted me to go with the flow and clear out all my glyphs I need for the season, and the pit is also fun to run until we get to the boss. And oh boy, Frozen Orb has a rough time there. Before that you are blasting, obliterating, destroying dreams, but once you get into the arena, you crash and burn. You're tanky, you can clear the boss, but you perform considerably worse than a Necro, which admittedly is much slower during the clear and also much slower than the Blizzard build, but one can burst and the other can ramp up its damage much more efficiently, resulting in just better burst. Would I still recommend Frozen Orb? Yes, absolutely. It's fun to play, makes you see absolutely nothing on the screen and looks like a true RPG build. Now at the end I will also include extended gameplay, especially for the higher tier boss, so you can have a look at what I mean by crashing. Now if you like what I do and want to support me, make sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you haven't already. I cover all sorts of RPGs, beat strategy, see RPG on this channel in form of extensive guides. So thank you very much for supporting me and let's dive into the meat. Now first a quick explanation how the build works. We are constantly firing Frozen Orbs and regenerating mana. As you can see, we drain our mana quite fast. However, we also regenerate it quite fast because we have a lot of mana regen. However, once we attack enemies, you will see my mana jumps constantly up to full because we have a lucky hit chance to restore mana on hit. This also works for conjurations which we spawn constantly, and our conjurations which we summon also have a chance to proc our Frozen Orbs. Because we have Ice Blades with enhanced Ice Blades cooldown reduction, we can constantly reset our teleport and lightning spear and of course Ice Blades, as well as Ice Armor to constantly spam those. Ice Armor also regenerates more mana regeneration, so that's why we regenerate mana as fast as we do. Now, because we have our conjurations here, we are also using Conjuration Mastery, which now gives us a multiplier, a more multiplier to damage and mana regeneration and a plus to movement speed. This means we are movement speed capped, have a ton of more multiplier to damage and a ton of mana regeneration. Here's Frigid Breeze to the lucky hit chance. Now, you might think Frozen Orb has a just 5% lucky hit chance, but every pulse, every hit of this ability will repeat this 5% chance and then generate mana, potentially instantly. We also combine this one with Avalanche to have a 10% chance to cast basically Frozen Orb for free with more damage, which is doubled versus vulnerable enemies. We make enemies constantly vulnerable because we have greater Frozen Orb, as well as Ice Blades, as well as Lightning Spear, which now can also make enemies vulnerable by critically striking them. Now we also have an immunity with Flame Shield, which is also constantly reset because we have our Ice Blades up, so you have like 3 or 5 Ice Blades up, which constantly lowers the cooldowns of your teleport and so on and so forth. And we have CDR, so teleport only has a 7-second cooldown, which is pretty damn good. Now for the enchantments we have Frozen Orb and Firebolt. Firebolt will make enemies burned, which we utilize with Fire Research for more mana regeneration and with Devouring Blaze for more damage and more multiplier. Now Frozen Orb enchant has a 30% chance to spawn an additional orb, and potentially we can also see 3 if we proc it right here. So those can double the chance because we have a double cast chance and this one works on the proc. So the temper gives us a chance to cast up to 4 Frozen Orbs, which is insane because each instance here, the Frozen Orb enchant and the regular one, are both considered a separate instance. So next let's have a look at our skill tree. We are going to start with Firebolt as well as Frostbolt. We need Firebolt for the burning enchant. Then we put everything into Frozen Orb, pick up Enhanced Frozen Orb for more damage and Greater Frozen Orb for vulnerable. In the defensive cluster we max out Teleport, pick out Enhanced Teleport and Shimmering Teleport for damage reduction right here. We have Elemental Attunement to reset the cooldown, Glass Cannon, as well as Ice Armor and Ice Armor Enhanced for more mana regeneration. We really need that. We have Shimmering Ice Armor to reduce the cooldown by spending more mana. We have Flame Shield for an immunity. Then we have our Conjurations with Summoned Ice Blade and Lightning Spear with Invoked Lightning Spear. So once Lightning Spear critically strikes, they will stun enemies. They will also make enemies vulnerable. So basically we are constantly making enemies vulnerable. We pick up Conjuration Mastery, which we can buff with our amulet. We pick Aligned Elements, Protection and Mana Shield for damage reduction and for a maximum life barrier. We really need that because our damage is dependent on barrier. Then we pick up Devouring Blaze, Fiery Surge in the Mastery cluster, Permafrost, Hoarfrost and Icy Touch for more damage, as well as Frigid Breeze, which will now generate a little bit of mana. This will be enough to sustain us completely, even without Tybalt's Will. Then we have Avalanche, which now gives us a lucky hit chance to make our next Frozen Orb free, deal more damage, and basically double the chance against vulnerable enemies. So we are constantly proccing this one. Now we are not going to abuse a bug with Veer's Mastery because this one works on all damage, not just on shock skills. So technically we can drop this one and then pick up Veer's Mastery, but we are not going to do this because we are not abusing bugs. So next up, our mana. You will see we have mana regeneration on our helmet, on our chest and on our boots. This one is even masterwork to +6. So we have 31 mana regeneration with the setup with Tal Rasha's Ring, which gives us resource generation, as well as here resource cost reduction to lower our resource cost of our Frozen Orb to just 36. Now 36 is a sizable amount of mana, but because we have so many mana multipliers with Enhanced Ice Armor, 30% here and 10% per Conjuration, and we are constantly spawning Conjurations, we basically have like 15 mana per second or even higher. With Frigid Breeze, we are constantly basically sustaining. And during regular play, you are also having Fiery Surge. The better your mana regeneration becomes, the less you're reliant on this one. During boss fights, you basically don't need this one anymore. So that's the indicator where you can respec this one. So you can take out those 3 points. Go to the core cluster, pick up Devastation and 2 points in Elemental Dominance, which is 8% more damage when cast above 50 mana. Because we are constantly above 50% mana, we are never going to drop this one and always have the 8% more damage, which is pretty damn good. Frigid Breeze, I do not advise taking out because we really need that one. Those 5 mana points are massive. And we also have Tybalt's Will, which will generate primary resource, which is mana, if we do run out of mana, especially during the transition period between level 70 and level 100 and not having those affixes on your helmet, chest and boots. Tybalt's Will come very handy. However, we don't need it. And why we are using it? Because damage reduction and because this one gives us 20% more damage. I have a better one, but this one has 2 sockets and I don't have any prisms. As you can see here, Scattered Prism, very low chance to get this one. You can only get this one from bosses and legions. I only had like 5 drops. So next up, the Aspect. We're going to use Ever Living on our helmet, Concentration on our chest, both of which will give us damage reduction, 1 versus vulnerable enemies, because we're always making enemies vulnerable, and 1 after casting a Conjuration spell, which we do all the time. Then on our gloves, we have Frozen Orbit, which will improve the damage of Frozen Orb. On our boots, Concussive Strikes, we have a high lucky hit chance. So this one will make enemies dazed, which improves our damage. That's 20% more damage. And dazed enemies cannot attack, they can only move. So this one is also a defensive aspect. So a pretty good deal. Next we have Fractured Winter Glass. If we don't have Winter Glass, we're going to use Storm Spell or Conceited. Otherwise, this one is essential, especially during endgame pushes and makes the build pop. Then we have our ring, our first one. This one has the Shredding Blades aspect on it. I know the vulnerable damage is a little bit lower at only 15%, not 30% because it's currently bugged. However, this one is a more multiplier that's basically unconditional for us. So this one buffs our damage quite a lot. We can exchange this one for something like the Ring of Starless Skies later on if you find the Uber unique, but for now we are going to use this one. We don't actually need the resource cost reduction at this point, so I can take this one off and still sustain. Then we have Tal Rasha's Iridescent Loop, which is basically just 45% more damage because we deal 3 elemental damage types. Constantly we have burning damage, we have shock damage with the Lightning Spear, and Teleport. We have also Flame Shield for flame damage, and we have our cold damage with those 2. Resource generation is pretty nice, lucky hit chance is also great, cooldown reduction is also great, so this one is overall a top tier ring. And for the weapons we have Conceited as well as Storm Spell, both of which work with barrier, so you want to constantly have barriers up, and we have constantly barrier up because we have the passives for this in our skill tree. Next up, the stats we want on our helmet: maximum life, mana regeneration, and the resistance to cap our resistances. I have poison resistance here. You can use, for example, also shadow resistance and use the gem instead in the winter glass. For the tempers, we have chill, slow potency, and freeze duration, so we can freeze enemies for longer. This is really great for the build. On our chest, we have maximum life, mana regeneration, armor, and total armor, as well as freeze duration, all of which are pretty great. You don't actually need to target anything. I was just very lucky with the armor modifier here. If you find a chest with a greater armor modifier, you don't actually need to upgrade anything. You can just slap it on with total armor and you are armor capped, just with those two affixes. On our gloves, we have intelligence, attack speed, and frozen orb. Those gloves are pretty bad. Crit strike chance is also great instead of intelligence, but for the tempered modifiers, we only have slow, which is basically like nothing. I would much rather have something like stun. And the damage to crowd controlled enemies is good versus regular enemies, but bad versus bosses. You want distant damage, not close, I repeat, not close, because we want to stay away from enemies. Enemies, especially in melee range, will move away from you and outside your range. So distant is around this, and your frozen orb, as soon as you hit an enemy right here, you're going to lose all of your close damage modifiers. So distant damage modifiers are better. However, if you don't want to dibble with that, you can just go with cold damage or vulnerable damage, both of which will apply to your damage and is unconditional, and is if you're standing next to an enemy or they're off-screening you or you're off-screening them, doesn't matter. You're still applying the damage. For the boots, we have maximum life, mana per second, and movement speed, as well as a chance to immobilize and movement speed. For our wand, we have vulnerable damage. I found a greater wand here on vulnerable damage, intelligence, and maximum life. We really need that maximum life. Now we have a chance to double cast frozen orb as shown previously and damage to distant. For the gems, vulnerable damage. For our focus, intelligence, crit strike chance, maximum life. I tried to find cooldown reduction, but we are constantly spamming our abilities anyway at this point, and more cooldown reduction would result in net damage loss because you have to press so many other buttons that are not frozen orb that this one is going to be considered bad. So maximum life is the way to go, and chance to frozen orb. Ideally on both you want to hit masterworks on chance to frozen orb, and on the last ring attack speed, crit strike chance, and crit damage. You can also go with vulnerable damage and damage to distant, as well as resist cost reduction. Ideally you want to exchange this one for a ring of starless skies. You will lose a considerable amount of attack speed here, but I don't think it's all that detrimental to the build. And lastly, the Paragaon bot. We're going to start with the enchanter glyph here. We max this one out at 21. This one provides you with 149.5 non-physical damage, which synergizes really well with the frigid fate node, which we cap out basically with just this node. With a little bit of masterworking, we can get this one to 30, which is the maximum. Next up is the frigid fate node, so you pick this one up very early on. Then you have the control glyph. You won't be able to activate this one right away, so you just pick this one up and then move on from this board. Then you pick up the flame feeder node, path all the way here, and this is in the icefall glyph board, so you pick up icefall. Then you path to the next one, you pick up elemental summoner, which will now buff your conjurations with a more multiplier. You pick up reinforced for a 50% damage reduction while you have a barrier. You always have a barrier up because you're constantly spamming cooldowns. Then we have the burning instinct board. We pick up the conjurer glyph here, which will improve our conjuration damage, but most importantly, the skill duration of conjurations will be improved by 20%, so we have more chances to have more conjurations up, which will stack our damage even further. Then we also have safeguard here, which we should pick up at this point. And we have oppressive down below for damage reduction versus vulnerable. We have damage reduction versus chilled. We have damage reduction versus vulnerable. So all of those will be picked up along the way now, because you're now entering the territory where you're entering the pit at around level 90, and you want to have those damage reduction. And lastly, we're going to pick up the keyless conduit board with the destruction glyph. This one is missing one dexterity node here, which translates to 20 critical strike damage, but we cannot fit anything else here. We need the defenses here, we need the defenses here, we need the defenses right here. Also resistances to all elements, and we want the lightning resistance to cap out lightning resistance without ever having to slot in lightning resistance. This will be achieved automatically for cold resistance and lightning resistance, and you only need poison, shadow, and fire resistance on any of your gear, either in your gem sockets or with tempering. So with this setup, you should be able to achieve 70% lightning resistance and 75% cold resistance without ever having to have it on your gear. Poison resistance as well as shadow resistance and fire resistance need one mod. Anyway, now a little bit of gameplay so you can enjoy the build in its nearly finished form. It is 93 to 95% there. I just need to masterwork this one, optimize the build a little bit more, and it is finished basically. So there's not much wiggle room for this build anymore. I think this build can clear up to 80, maybe 90 pit level. Higher is going to be very tough because of boss DPS. The bosses are extremely tanky. So you are going to clear the pit, but you're not going to clear the boss of the pit because your DPS is too low. You can still masterwork everything to plus 12 with this build because you can clear 60, can clear 70, but you're going to struggle above. Blizzard does not have this problem. Compared to Blizzard, this build is faster in clearing. It is faster to play. It is more engaging to play, but Blizzard has more DPS, of course, and better burst because you can set up your blizzards. So a boss spawns and is immediately blasted by ice spikes. This is not the case for this build. If you liked what you saw, make sure to like, comment and subscribe if you have not already. You can also support me some more by joining the channel membership, which will allow me to keep making videos. So thank you very much for watching and see you next time. Bye.
I need time to prepare that. I'm not ready yet. 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 I need time to prepare that. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet.